Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Politics Matters podcast. This is, I think, our first post-election day episode. Yeah, maybe. It's been crazy. I've kind of lost track, in all honesty. But I do want to do some analysis because, obviously, we have new election results since we last talked. And I think that there are a lot of takes that can be accurately made when analyzing these results. So, obviously, go follow me on Twitter at Ryan Jakubowski. Go read my writing at uepyt.substack.com. But today I want to look at these Senate races and a few of these governor's races as well. The House we're saving for next episode because, again, it's one of those things where we have we have an idea Republicans probably going to have 221, 222 seats, depending on how those last Central Valley races go. But I want to talk about that in another podcast because I think it's so complex. But let's talk about the Senate map here. So the fundamental composition of the Senate map was essentially one that leaned pretty solidly towards Democrats, kind of like the reverse 2018. Obviously, there was a path for the other party in both these years, but the elections that were up in these states benefited the party in power, which gave them kind of an unfair advantage. Because in 2018, Democrats had to defend Senate seats in like ridiculously Republican states, right? Like Heidi Heitkamp had to run for re-election in South Dakota, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, John Tester in Montana, right? And so you had all these red state Democrats running for re-election, and some of them, Tester held on, Manchin held on, Brown held on, right? But a lot of them didn't. Like Heidi Heitkamp got beat pretty badly in North Dakota. Again, not to take away from her performance. Again, she came within 10 points of winning, which is impressive for a Democrat in North Dakota, but, she still lost. Missouri and Indiana were both pretty bad for McCaskill and Donnelly. They both lost by around 6 points. And then Democrats also got upset in Florida, which was a state that they were expected to win by a couple points, and they lost it by, what was it, like 0.2%? So it was really close, but Democrats still lost Florida. And so they were able to, Democrats had a good, performance in most of those races, just that the map that was up forced them to defend super Republican states, and they had no margin for error. So they lost those 4 races, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, Florida, and even though they picked up Nevada and Arizona, even though they held on to Ohio, West Virginia, and Montana, it still didn't matter because, they got wiped out in those deep red states. And so the Republicans didn't have to actually defend anything, within deep red territory, but they did kind of, have an unfair advantage of having to target Democrat, like their top Democratic targets. None of them were in states that Trump won. They were all in Biden states. Some of them were close, obviously, but there was no easy, wave midterm target the way, Heidi Heitkamp was in 2018, or, go back to 2014, where Republicans had 6 auto flips because Democrats, had seats in Montana, South Dakota, Louisiana, Arkansas. And so they didn't have that. So they never had that one Senate seat to kind of bank on to, get to the majority. And so they had to go play in Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, which, again, are states that they've been competitive in, but they're Biden states, and they're states that are, specifically specifically Arizona and Georgia, are left trending. And so the Republicans just had a structural disadvantage. And, combine that with the fact that, the Democrats, had incumbent, obviously these are all Democratic incumbents, but the Republican Party, the seats they had to defend, 3 of those 4, Republicans had 4 races that were contested that they had to defend, which were Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. 3 of those 4 seats that they held they had retiring incumbents, and the only one that didn't was Wisconsin. Ron Johnson had a 35% approval rating. So they just had a really bad map dealt to them, which put them at a structural disadvantage for this election, again, the inverse of 2018. Now, to their credit, they were able to hold on to, all the Trump states, right? Ohio, J.D. Vance took care of business. He beat Tim Ryan, although, again, I really, that race to me, that was a moral victory for Tim Ryan, right? He lost by 6 points. He will not be senator from Ohio, but he dragged all 3 congressional Democrats in toss-up races across the finish line, right? Democrats, won the swing district in Cincinnati. They won the working class district in the Toledo area that was gerrymandered, and they won the Akron seat. And those were seats that they would not have won had Tim Ryan not done so well at the top of the ticket. Additionally, Tim Ryan made this race was safe Republican in the spring. Tim Ryan made it a competitive race. He forced Mitch McConnell to spend $30 million here when McConnell could have been spending it to bail out Oz in Pennsylvania, or Laxalt in Nevada, or Walker in Georgia, right? But he had to go to Ohio. He had to bail out Vance. And yeah, JD Vance, in the end took care of business, but it should not have been this close. This should have been a 12-point victory, and it should have been just very decisive, and it should have been over by June. And that was not what happened. It was down to the wire in a lot of polls, and I never had Tim Ryan, really within reasonable striking distance of JD Vance, but a lot of Republicans were really worried about Vance over the summer, and they had to spend a lot of money in a state they really shouldn't have had to contest. North Carolina was kind of interesting to me because it was about what I expected. Bud won by 3.5. I had him. That was basically the exact margin I had him winning by. But Beasley basically ran she didn't run an amazing campaign, but I think she did a good job of keeping it close. And again, her turnout operation with black voters wasn't amazing. Democrats lost a lot of ground in those rural black areas. But what she did was she was able to kind of secure Democratic margins in the suburbs. And if you look at, say Orange County, which again is the county that is directly above Wake, which is where Raleigh is. Beasley did better than Biden there. She did better than Biden in Chatham. She did, about the same as Biden in Wake, which is obviously where Raleigh is. And if you look at Mecklenburg, which is, the biggest county in the state, I believe, it's where Charlotte is, compared to Biden, she held her own. She only did about 2% worse than Biden in the county, despite the fact that Biden did really well there. So she was able to kind of, I think, support Democrats at the top of the ticket. Wiley Nickel obviously won that key House race in the 13th district for Democrats, and that was really beneficial to Beasley. But she did fairly well. Again, if it were a red wave, she would have lost by 6 or 7, but she came within 4. So Beasley did quite well in that, in that election, I would say, even though it wasn't an amazing showing the way Democrats had amazing showings in Pennsylvania. So speaking of Pennsylvania, let's go there first. That's our first of these true toss-up races that we'll be looking at. So so John Fetterman won by 4.8%, and I think we have a couple thousand provisionals to count, but he'll win by basically that amount. And he did better than Biden in every county except for 2, which are Pike and Monroe, which are these are counties that he won Monroe and he narrowly lost Pike, or he lost Pike actually by a bit. But these are small counties, and his underperformance of Biden was by a point. So every other county, I don't know how many counties are in Pennsylvania, but he was 98% of counties did better than Biden, and that's what matters, right? Philadelphia, biggest county in the state, did 3.5 points better than Biden. Scranton, not Scranton, but Lackawanna, which is home of Scranton, Fetterman ended up outrunning Biden in that county by 7%. Let's talk about Erie, which is kind of the swing county of Pennsylvania. He did 8% better than Biden. And of course, his home county, Allegheny, Pittsburgh, this, West Pennsylvania, Yins, I guess, as they say, that's Fetterman's home, it's his home county. He outran Biden by 7.5 there. And that's a big county, right? Pittsburgh, big city. Democrats need to net tens of thousands, in this case, hundreds of thousands of votes from the county itself to win statewide. Fetterman outran Biden by 7.5, right? So he was able to rack up big numbers in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Erie, and Scranton. And Oz wasn't able to make it up in rural areas. Just look at these rural counties. Again, it's not on the screen, but pull up a map of Western Pennsylvania. Oz didn't lose any of these counties. These are deep red, Trump plus 40 counties, but he won them by 32 instead of 40 in a lot of cases, right? I'll read some of them off just to give you an idea. Forest County did 10% worse than Trump. Venango did 9.5% worse than Trump. Clarion, 10% worse than Trump. Jefferson, 8% worse than Trump. Elk, 8% worse than Trump. Cameron, 10% worse than Trump. McKean, 6% worse than Trump. Again, these are all small counties that are pretty rural that I don't know much about, but they all trended towards Fetterman by good amounts. So he ended up netting, or Oz ended up netting thousands or tens of thousands of votes less than Trump in that region of Pennsylvania. And if you look at the Pittsburgh call, which again, this is a region I've been obsessed with for the past 2 years. In 2020, I was saying, how Biden has to outrun Hillary Clinton in the Pittsburgh caller, which he ended up doing. It's why he won Pennsylvania. Let's talk about Westmoreland County. This is the, kind of the center of Republican votes in Western Pennsylvania. This is, right outside of Pittsburgh. These are, kind of the exurbs. These are working class conservative towns. Oz won it by 20% or 19%, and he ended up netting about 32,000 votes out of Westmoreland County. For comparison, in 2020, Trump ended up netting about 50,000 votes. So Oz netted 18,000 votes less than Trump out of this, big red county, and it trended 9% towards Fetterman. So massive overperformance for Fetterman, Westmoreland. Washington and Beaver, these are, counties that used to be blue that have trended red in recent years. Fetterman lost both of them, but in Washington he did 9% better, and in Beaver he also did 9% better. So again, those margins for Oz were terrible in the Pittsburgh caller. I think we can tie it a bit to Fetterman being from Pittsburgh, but a good chunk of it was that I think Fetterman just genuinely ran a better campaign than Oz, right? Regardless of what you think of Oz or Fetterman, Fetterman was clearly, I think, a better fit for that region of the state because he ran a very, working class. I'm the guy from Braddock. I'm going to, make more, he said S-H-I-T. I don't swear on these podcasts, right? Like make more stuff in America, okay? Oz was running a campaign for the Philadelphia suburbs, which, again, we'll talk about the Philly suburbs in a few minutes from now. But Fetterman spent a good chunk of his time in these red counties. Again, look at his, Twitter's in real life, but look at the videos he posts. He had, he was holding rallies in all these, big, deep red counties. And he was saying, look, we're not going to win these counties, but we're going to reduce the margins, right? Every county, every vote. That's what he said. And he ended up outrunning Biden by good amounts in these counties. And again, a lot of that is, look, Fetterman, Biden had to run for president. Fetterman's only running in Pennsylvania. So Fetterman could, spend more time in these small towns in Pennsylvania than Biden could, right? I get that. But it's still undeniably impressive that Fetterman was off the campaign trail for a good chunk of this election because of his stroke, which I'm, by the way, very glad he's recovered from. Very happy for him, right? But he was off the campaign trail. He was, being branded consistently as, a liberal, out of touch, lived in his mom's basement until he was 50 years old or 40 years old, right? Like all of those attacks never really landed. And I think, we joke about it. We've been joking about it for the past 5 months, right? Everything always tried to stick on Fetterman, right? Like first it was that he's, the initial ads from like July were that Fetterman's a, Bernie Sanders, right? That didn't stick. Then it became Fetterman lived in his mom's basement. Then it became Fetterman, right? He had a stroke. He's not fit to serve. None of them really sticked. Obviously, some voters said that the stroke was a concern to them, but some of them ended up voting for Fetterman anyways. And others, it just didn't make up a big enough share of the electorate. Now compare that to what happened, just literally, this is backed up by exit polling. Look at the attacks that Fetterman's campaign made on Oz throughout the cycle. Is mostly that, he's just like an out of touch rich guy from New Jersey. And if you take a look at, most important issue for the voters in Pennsylvania, the plurality said abortion. But if you look at specifically, they asked voters, has Oz lived in Pennsylvania long enough to serve you well, right? 54%. The majority said no, he has not lived in the state long enough. So that to me is just like a telltale sign. When I saw that exit poll, I thought it was really dicey for Dr. Oz, right? But like that's just a telltale sign for me of what was to come. And ultimately, Oz was unable to rack up any, formidable margins in rural areas. And then, like I said, his campaign was more Philly suburb based. Let's talk about the Philly suburbs. He didn't do as poorly there as compared to the rural areas, but Bucks County, this is kind of the swing county in the Philly suburbs. Trump lost it by 4. Oz lost it by 7. Let's go to Montgomery. Trump lost it by 30. Oz lost it by 32 or 33 rather. Chester, Oz ran even with Trump, which is still pretty bad. Again, I know it's better compared to his statewide performance, but Trump lost Chester by 17 and Fetterman netted 43. Or Biden, let's see how many votes Biden netted out of Chester. I'm checking it right now. Biden netted, about 54,000 votes out of Chester. Yeah, Fetterman netted 44,000. So, when you adjust for lower turnout, that's still pretty good for Fetterman. And then, you talk about Philadelphia itself. Philadelphia County, Fetterman won it. He got 83% of the vote there. Biden got 81%. So Fetterman in the city itself and in the suburbs was able to run even or a bit above Biden. Again, the swings in Western Pennsylvania were like 8-9 points towards him. Philadelphia caller was more like a point or so towards him. But again, Oz had to Trump did really badly in the Philly caller to begin with. So the fact that Oz just didn't even do better than Trump in any of these counties except for Chester by 0.2% is just terrible for him. And then our final region of the state, I guess you could say, is northeastern Pennsylvania. That's Scranton, that's Luzerne County, Monroe County, and also I do want to talk about Allentown, because Allentown obviously is close to north. So essentially, I don't have it on screen, and I don't want to talk in circles here, but once you work your way up from the Philly suburbs, you get to Allentown, then to Scranton. And so Allentown, the county it's in, Lehigh County, that trended 3% towards Fetterman. So he did better in Allentown than Biden. Northampton, which is another swing county that tends to vote for the winner, whoever wins the state, Fetterman did 4.5 points better than Biden. And then you look at Lackawanna, home to Scranton. This is a big population center. Democrats need to net tens of thousands of votes out of Scranton to win statewide. But Fetterman won it by 16. Biden won it by 9. And that was Biden's home county. He was born in Scranton. Fetterman did 6 or 7% better there than he did. So Fetterman, just all across the board, but specifically the working class voters, that was like his biggest, improvement over Biden. Outran Biden, and Oz just did not have the turnout. He did all right in some of these rural areas, but again, didn't have the turnout, didn't net enough votes, and he lost. And, it wasn't even close, right? Like, he'll lose by almost 5 points at the end of the day. That race was supposed to be within, a point or so either way, no matter who won. Obviously, we knew Fetterman could win. I didn't actually. That was the race I got wrong. I'm going to get every Senate race right. But Pennsylvania's the one I got wrong. I had Oz winning by half a point. He'll lose by almost 5. This will not be a close race when it's all said and done. And it's mostly just he wasn't able to have that appeal. He was supposed to do well in the Philly suburbs, never materialized, and he just collapsed in Western Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, really bad for Republicans in Oz. And it, by the way, not to take away from Oz running a bad campaign, but it didn't help him that Mastriano, running for governor, lost by 14 points, got like his teeth kicked out by Josh Shapiro. And when your candidate for governor is losing by 14, it's really hard to have a big enough ticket split to survive the Senate race. And so that's, I think, what killed Oz at the end of the day. New Hampshire is brief. I don't really think there's much to say. I know people thought it was competitive. I never bought into it. A lot of people were saying, New Hampshire is going to be close this year, right? Don Bolduc can beat Maggie Hassan, obviously the incumbent Democrat there. But my stance was that Hassan was going to win by 5, because it's a left-trending state. It's a very pro-choice state. And in 2020, Biden won it by 7, despite, the polls are pretty accurate. And the polls, until the last week of the campaign, had Hassan up by pretty comfortable amounts. And, aside from Trafalgar and that one St. Anselm poll, no one really had it, going to Bolduc. So I was kind of like, okay, this shouldn't be close. But I didn't expect it to be a 10-point margin. Hassan winning by 10 is very impressive. It's an underrated result. It's going to get swept under the rug because Democrats had a lot of other good results. But Hassan winning by 10 was shocking to me, because she outran Biden in essentially, I think, every county. And she did really well in Stratford and Merrimack, which are, again, where Concord and Rochester are within the state. And she just racked it up with suburban voters. I don't know why she did so well, to be honest. I think it's mostly just, Dobbs' backlash against the GOP. But she did really well with suburban voters, specifically, in that Rochester, Dover, coastal area that tends to be very wealthy. She racked it up there. So that, I think, is worth talking about. I do want to go to Wisconsin before we talk about our final big 2 races. Again, Georgia went to a runoff, so we'll do more of that analysis as we get closer to December 6th, but no conclusion there yet. But Wisconsin, let's just talk about Wisconsin, okay? This was a really weird result, and I say that because I missed on Wisconsin this year. I was if there's a state that I just was terrible on, it was Wisconsin. I had Evers in the governor's race, the incumbent Democrat. I had him losing by 3.5. He's going to win by 3.5. So I had a 7-point or almost 7-point error there. So Tony Evers, thanks for totally knocking out my accuracy in Wisconsin. Appreciate it. And then in the Senate race, I had Barnes down by 5. He's going to lose by 0.9. So Wisconsin Democrats did a lot better than I expected. It's mostly because Dane County was just massive for Mandela Barnes, right? If you take a look at turnout in counties that trended to the left, it was essentially Dane County that kept Barnes afloat statewide. He won it with 77% of the vote, and it trended 2% to the left. And then if you look at Milwaukee, he won it with 70%. That's his home county. Won it with 70%, and he did about a point better than Biden there. And so those are really impressive margins for him. Again, it wasn't enough to knock off Ron Johnson, right? Because Democrats gave up on Barnes. They did. Things were looking good for them in August. They gave him some money. Ron John came in with the spending blitz over Barnes, and he kind of just cut off Barnes' polling lead. Barnes ended up, being down in the polls heading into mid-September, and Democrats just gave up at that point, right? They're just like, okay, well, Johnson's got this. And, they left town, right? And then 6 weeks later, the election results roll in, and Barnes is only going to lose this. Like, Barnes lost this race by 25,000 or 26,000 votes, okay? So I think that, give Barnes an extra couple $1 million. He probably would have won that race, in all honesty, just to put it out there. But again, Democrats played poorly in Wisconsin this year with their spending decisions. Because again, Tony Evers was supposed to lose, and he ended up winning by 3.5 points in the governor's race. And Barnes was supposed to kind of lose decisively, and he's going to lose by like a very small amount. And then, taking a look at where Johnson did well, I think to his credit, he did fairly well. Looking at Green Bay, he did better than Trump there by a couple of points. He did better than Trump in some of these rural areas. Because again, the reason I was so kind of bullish on Republicans to do well in Wisconsin this year was because I was like, okay, well, look, these rural counties that like Biden got like 40% of the vote, and they're all going to swing massively towards Johnson and Tim Michels in the governor's race. So, like, the swings we saw were like 5 to 6 points towards Ron John, which again were relatively tame compared to what I was expecting, which is why the margin wasn't as big. But Johnson still did really well in rural areas. And then, like, if you look at the wild counties, which are, again, the Milwaukee suburbs, these are, like, the big, important counties. Ozaukee, Johnson did 4% better than Trump. Washington, 3.5% better. Waukesha, the all-important county, right outside of Milwaukee, he did 5% better. And, again, Waukesha is big. He netted 60,000 votes there. And in 2020, as a share of the electorate, Trump actually netted less votes than Ron Johnson out of Waukesha. So that is pretty important. It's just a pretty big deal to see that kind of shift against Mandela Barnes in those suburbs. And Barnes was able to decently well with the driftless working class regions. Again, like in La Crosse, Barnes only did 2% worse than Biden there. And again, La Crosse is a right-trending county. Barnes should have done like 5 to 6% worse than Biden in all these counties, and he only ended up doing like a point or so worse. So that was impressive to me. But overall, Wisconsin, I think Democrats are kind of kicking themselves because, like, had they given Barnes, say, $8 million more, which they had because they were spending money, right, on like Tim Ryan and John Fetterman. And I think Tim Ryan, they shouldn't have actually spent money on him. John Fetterman, I think in retrospect, they would have won it anyways. Give that money to Barnes, and I think Wisconsin might have 2 Democrats in the Senate right now, just to put it out there. Again, it's hard to say because we don't know how Johnson would have campaigned if Barnes had more money. But what I will say is that Barnes is going to lose by 26,000 votes in the election he got massively outspent in. A lot of things could be different right now if Democrats had spent more money propping his campaign up. Now, let's move over to Arizona because Arizona was another pretty interesting result here. So we have a couple thousand ballots left for Maricopa, which might reduce Kelly's lead a little bit. But right now he's up by 5, and it'll be similar again. Even if Masters wins all those ballots, it'll be like a 4.8% win instead of like a 4.9% win for Kelly. Doesn't matter. Yeah, this is just a really bad showing for Blake Masters, right? Starting with Maricopa, this is a county. So Maricopa is obviously like a big, all-encompassing suburban. It's a city of Phoenix, but also it's suburbs as well. So it's not like deep blue the way some of these urban counties are in other states. And it's kind of the swing county, right? Like it voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Biden in 2020, and that's what tipped the state to Biden this time in 2020. And it historically it votes about 1.5 to 2% to the left of the state. So Biden won it by like 2.5 while losing statewide while winning statewide by 0.3. So it was 2% more Democratic in the state in 2020. Kelly's gonna win it by 6 this year, and he'll win by 5 statewide. So again, it continued the trend of being about 2 points to the left of the state. But Masters' margin statewide. He's gonna. I don't know if these provisionals gonna break or if these last couple like 4,000 votes are gonna break. But right now he's down statewide by 126,000. Okay, he lost Maricopa by 100,000. Right. So take away Maricopa, Masters would lose state. Like he'd be within 20. Like he'd be in a Mandela Barnes type spot where he'd be very close. Right. Like he'd lose by 25,000 votes. Take away Maricopa. But he just did so poorly there. He collapsed in the suburbs. He had no appeal to voters in the city of Phoenix itself, and he had like terrible turnout from the redder parts of the county, and like in the rural southern parts of Maricopa County. Nothing. He just completely collapsed in Maricopa. Talk about Pima. This is where Tucson is. This is a county where this Masters is like home county. He was never going to win it, but he should have done better, right? He lost it by 26,000 votes. Okay, in 2020, or not 26, sorry, not 26,000 votes, 26%. In 2020, Trump lost it by 19. So he did 7% worse in his home county. And if you look at the number of votes netted, Kelly's going to end up netting 104,000 votes from Pima County. Biden only netted 90,000. And again, that's a higher turnout election. So Kelly like literally outdid Biden overall in terms of just votes in Pima in a midterm election. Finally, look at these counties in these rural areas, right? Gila County, Yavapai County, Graham County, Greenlee County, Mojave County. These are smaller rural counties, or not? They're not super small because Arizona counties are pretty big if they draw the lines differently. But like, you know, these are counties that Trump netted, like just Yavapai, for example. Trump netted 42,000 votes there, but Masters is only going to net 30,000. Mojave in 2020, Trump netted. That was Matt. I'm just checking the results anyway. Trump netted 54,000 votes in Mojave in 2020. Masters only net 37,000. So Masters literally lost like 17K in Mojave. Yavapai, he lost like 15K. Gila, Graham, and Greenlee, I don't know how well he did in these other counties, but I'm assuming it's similar, right? And, you know, add those all up, you know, say it's an average of 15K per county, 15 times 5 is like 75,000 votes. And that's that in Maricopa is the difference. Doesn't matter how well Masters would have done in Pima or how well he would have done with Native American voters in the northern part of the state. He had no ability to rack up margins in rural counties. And, you know, once that happened, it was hard for him. And once he just didn't get the numbers that he needed out of the Phoenix suburbs, terrible. So my guess why this happened is that Masters' campaign was really off-putting. The day Masters was called, which was last week, I remember seeing on Twitter, like everyone was like looking at like saying like he looked weird, like, you know, he's a really off-putting guy. And honestly, at first I was like, this doesn't really matter, right? But like I rewatched some of his campaign ads. He's not charismatic, and right, like regardless whether you like him more than Kelly was able to brand himself as like, look, I'm a cool astronaut who is, you know, working for bipartisan common sense politician stuff, right? You know, whether you think that's true or not, up to you, but it doesn't matter. You know what Masters did? Masters filmed videos of himself shooting guns and talking about how abortion is murder and like, you know, really weird. His campaign was just, I think, disorganized. He got cut off by national Republicans with 2 months prior to the election, so he was kind of just a lost cause walking into election day. But like, I think Kelly just outclassed him, and it didn't help that Kelly was massively outspending him. So Masters just didn't have to appeal to moderate suburban voters, and I think that his lack of outreach and lack of I think appeal to these rural areas just cost him. And, you know, he's going to end up losing, right, by like what is I forgot the margin already. He'll lose by like 126,000 votes statewide. He could have easily made that up by just doing a little better in Maricopa and some of those rural counties, but just not a good campaign overall by Masters. And I think Kelly just really ran underratedly the campaign of the cycle. I mean, not of the cycle, but I think Kelly, as an incumbent, winning by 5 in a Biden, but Kelly won in 2020 by 2.5. He'll double that this year, just to put it in perspective, despite the fact that it's a redder year and whatnot. So just wanted to point that out. Now, Nevada. This is the final of these big 4 races, and Nevada is just I've always been fascinated by Nevada. It's my favorite state, just for the record, and I am very happy that I got it right this year because this was a hard race to call. So Catherin, Cortez, Masto, incumbent Democrats going to win by 9,000 votes when it's all said and done, which again, tiny margin, right? Like she'll win by under a point in terms of percentages. And just to put in perspective how close it was, those 9,000 votes literally just came from Washoe County. Take away Washoe County, I don't know the exact number, but it would be like within 100 votes statewide either way, right? And again, Washoe, that's home to Reno. That's, you know, this is a rapidly growing left trending college-y, you know, young county, I guess. Again, this is where kind of a bunch of Californians are moving. It's where the college is. It's where UNR is. It's where a bunch of skiers are moving, right? Like this is like the new thing in Nevada, right? And 6 years ago, Cortez Masto lost it by, I think, 2,000 votes. Okay. This year, she's going to win it by 9,000, and that's a difference statewide. The growth of Washoe County alone re-elected Catherin Cortez Masto and may have handed Democrats the Senate majority. Just wanted to point that out. Another thing, Clark County. The benchmark for Cortez Masto was 50,000 votes, maybe a little more, a little less. She's going to net 53,000 votes out of Clark County. So she beat her benchmark by 3,000 in Clark. She did a little worse than expected in these rural counties. Again, like if you look at the swing from 2020, Elko was a spot where I thought that she'd do a little better than Biden, but she did about a point worse. And then, looking at the swings in these counties that were not super rural, but I guess like partially rural, like Story, Leon, and Douglas, they all trended 3 to 4 points towards Adam Laxalt. So Laxalt held his own in the areas south of Reno and in these rural cow counties like Elko. Literally, I have experience in these counties because I not experience, but like I drove through them. Right, like the counties we're talking about, like the counties were like it's just a highway and you have 12 people in the entire county. Obviously, I'm joking, but like those counties should be going for Republicans like massively, and they did vote for Laxalt obviously, but he didn't add enough votes, and that's what cost him. Because again, he underperformed really poorly in Washoe, or really severely in Washoe. He was supposed to keep within 50,000 in Clark. That didn't happen, so he had to make up votes in Elko and all these other rural counties, and he did well there. He outran Trump there, but he didn't have enough turnout. So that's what came down to. That's really came down to at the end of the day. Cortez Masto is going to end up winning by 9,000 votes statewide, which is just pretty insane to me that it was that close. Because again, like not to say it wasn't going to be close, but right, literally Washoe County alone gave her the victory, and that's just to me that's just always insane to think about. It's always fun to think about how chuck out one county and it's completely different. So let's talk about a few more races here before we move to the governor's map. Washington, this is a race where Republicans were supposedly competitive. They're going to lose it by 15. Colorado, this was a race that was supposed to be single digits. Michael Bennett's going to win by 16 points over Joe Day. And like that just shows, because like Joe Day ran like a very moderate, I'm a pro-choice Republican. I'm not pro-Trump campaign, because like he was trying to turn back the clock in the Denver suburbs. All right, he did worse than Trump in the Denver suburbs, and obviously he ran a much more moderate campaign than Trump ever ran. And I think that just like shows how gone Colorado is for Republicans, because again, there was hope that like Republicans would stop the bleeding in Colorado this year, and they're going to lose it by more than they did in 2020, which was already pretty bad. Iowa, Chuck Grassley won by 12. That's literally exactly what Selzer predicted. So once again, she got it right. But like if you look at Chuck Grassley's past showings, like 2016 he won by 30, 2010 he probably won by even more than that, right? Like this wasn't even that good for Grassley. That he only won by 12. So overall, like looking at the Senate map, outside of Florida, which I think we all know was disastrous for Val Demings and the Democrats. Like just to put in perspective, Marco Rubio won Miami-Dade County, which is like the big Democratic county in the past, by 9 points. So that's just shows how bad it went for Florida Democrats. But right, like outside of Florida Senate race, Republicans didn't have like any meaningful of performances, and that to me just suggests that they had no message, right? First it was inflation. Inflation went down a bit. Then it was kind of like, oh, well, gas prices and, right? But like just whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, just try to like reason with me here. What was the Republicans' message to voters on election day? Like what were they saying? Like Democrats was abortion, abortion, abortion. Okay, fine. Republicans, they didn't have much. It was specific in different races, right? Like in Wisconsin, Johnson was like the only I think, well, he wasn't successful because he only won by a point, but like he like won a close race, right? His stuff was just like radical liberal Mandela Barnes. I always tried that in Pennsylvania with John Fetterman. It clearly didn't work out. In Nevada, Laxalt tried to tie Cortez Masto to Biden, but it clearly didn't buy that. And in Arizona, Blake Masters was trying to, kind of like, it was funny because Masters was like trying to moderate on abortion, but he couldn't. But Kelly was like, because like the thing with Masters is that he was very pro or very anti-abortion during the primary to win over that conservative base. Then once he won the primary, he kind of pivoted to the general. But the thing is, Mark Kelly had like already branded him as a very right winger as a very right wing person on abortion. So he was like kind of unable to get his word in because he was underfunded and he didn't have enough money to compete on the airwaves. So Masters like tried to change his position on abortion, but he couldn't just because he was kind of getting just outshouted by Mark Kelly. And so the Senate map was just really bad for Republicans. Had there been elections in other states that weren't up this year, could have been different, but they're going to lose their seat in Pennsylvania, and they're going to be unable to pick up Nevada or Arizona. And Georgia, they lost Georgia was a very pro-Republican electorate that elected Brian Kemp by like 8% was, fairly white, fairly GOP leaning. And Walker lost the vote by 0.9%. And again, it's a runoff, but Walker still lost that electorate by, almost a full point. So Republicans, I think, didn't really think have any like silver linings outside of Florida. But again, they already can win Florida. So I don't really know if you can call that as much of a silver lining. So that's the Senate map. Now, governor's map, I do want to talk about for a bit here because I think, first of all, I will own up to my mistakes here. There were 3 races I got wrong, and I want to look at those specifically. So we'll start in Arizona, which I've already talked about here extensively with Mark Kelly and Blake Masters. Similar thing, just to a smaller scale. So Masters lost by 5% statewide. Kari Lake's going to lose by about 0.6 or 0.55. So she outran Masters, and she actually did a lot better than him in Maricopa. She'll lose it by 1.5. He lost it by 6. So that's her home county. That's where she's supposed to be doing well. She did end up doing decently well there, but her again, rural turnout all across the board in the state for Republicans is just not good. And Kari Lake just did not do well enough in Pima. Right, she was supposed to get like some level of like GOP gains with Hispanic voters along the border. She did better in Yuma, but she did worse in the Tucson area. She did worse in Santa Cruz, and she just did not do well in Cochise. So again, those kind of names might not have meaning to you, like if you don't know all the names of the counties in Arizona, right? But Kari Lake ran in a state that Biden won by like 0.3%, and she ran even with Trump in most counties, but she just was unable to make those gains around the border, and because she fell short there, she just wasn't able to make it up anywhere else. So that's really what happened. I also think that she could have actually won Maricopa County had she not been quite frankly, lying with the election, right? Because like she was an election truther. She said the election was stolen, which obviously there's no proof for that, and it's annoying we still have to be having this conversation 2 years later. But that's not a popular position to take, right? Like 60% of voters in Arizona probably disagree with her on that issue. And so the fact that she was running on that issue, I think really like deeply hurt her with suburban moderate voters that were maybe looking to vote for, the more reasonable or more moderate of the candidates. And Kari Lake did herself no favors in that sense because she was just lying with the election. That I think turned a lot of people off who might have otherwise voted for her. And then on top of that, Katie Hobbs had Hispanic advantage on TV. So that's, that is interesting to me. Kansas is the second race I got wrong. And Kansas, I'm kind of mad at myself. Like, right, Arizona, all the polls let Katie Hobbs down. No one picked her to win. Okay, fine. Kansas, though, I'm not happy with myself for that call because the final Emerson poll had Kelly up by 3. Obviously, Kelly's the incumbent Democrat governor. And she had all the momentum heading into election day. Schmidt was kind of collapsing, and everyone seemed to be getting on the Kelly hype train, and I just didn't want to hop on it. I was kind of being contrarian, right? But I was saying, look, partisanship's going to bail out Derek Schmidt because he'll win by 2 or 3 points statewide, and it'll just because he did won enough of the moderate Republican voters that backed Kelly in 2018, right? And Schmidt did better than Kobach in 2018. So Kobach lost by 5 to Kelly in 2018. He'll lose by 2, but Schmidt still lost Sedgwick, which is where Wichita is. He still lost. He got crushed in Topeka and in Kansas City, and he just was not able to win over the moderate Republican voters. Because again, I said on my prediction video, I was like, there are going to be a lot of moderate Republicans who don't mind Laura Kelly who are still going to vote for Derek Schmidt just to protest Joe Biden, right? Like, my logic was that Republican moderates were going to back Kelly to an extent, but not enough to overcome the partisanship of her state. And what happened? She won them anyways. The final polls had her. The final Emerson poll had her winning them. I should have trusted it, and she's going to win statewide by 2 points. Okay, so again, there are a lot more factors at play than moderate voters in the suburbs. Again, Schmidt did not do well in rural areas. He was unable to net anything out of these rural counties, right? But still, he did not do well in the suburbs, and he could have easily made up for his rural losses with maybe winning Wichita, doing better in the outskirts of Topeka and Kansas City, and that never happened. So Laura Kelly, congrats on your reelection. It always is fun for. I mean, obviously I'm a Democrat, but it's always interesting to see Republicans winning in blue states and Democrats winning in red states. Kelly will make sure that Kansas is governed by Democrats for another 4 years. Final governor's race we'll talk about here that I got wrong. Wisconsin here. I was a big Tim Michaels believer. And it was, my logic was that the rural areas are going to swing against Tony Evers, and that his working class support from 22 was going to completely erode, and that he wouldn't be able to make those losses up in the Milwaukee suburbs, even if he did better there. Which again, he outran his 2018 numbers in all the WOW counties, so he did massively improve there. And I was right about the rural areas trending towards Tim Michaels. Evers underperformed his 2018 figures in most of these rural counties, which did hurt him statewide. But the things I was mostly wrong about were that, A, working class voters still backed Evers. A lot of these, like La Crosse, he did better than Biden in by 4%. And in a lot of these smaller working class counties, white, driftless, working class areas, he did better than Biden as well. And then finally, turnout for Madison was just sky high. It was off the charts. It literally, as a share of the electorate, exceeded 2020 by like 4 or 5 points. It was just crazy. So, buoyed by really good numbers with independents and working class voters, Evers was able to kind of just win off turnout. Michaels clearly did not, in retrospect, have a good turnout operation. I think that's what's going to end up costing him here. So, Tony Evers stunned me. I did not think he was going to win. I was I would have bet a lot of money that he was going to lose, and it looks like I'm going to be happy that I didn't bet any money on that, because Tony Evers is going to be governor of Wisconsin. And by the way, he it wasn't even by 1,000 votes. It wasn't a squeaker. It was called on election night. He's going to win by 90,000 votes, which is a lot more than Biden won by. So Tony Evers, just fascinating result there. Will be puzzling me until the end of time, the fact that he was able to pull this off. But hey, congrats to him. Again, there are a few more governor's races you could talk about, like Georgia. Kemp beat Abrams by 8 there. Maine, Mills beat LePage by 13. Michigan was just a bloodbath for Republicans. They lost by 10.5 points in a race they should have been competitive in, that they were expected to win, according to Trafalgar. So that, to me, is pretty funny that Whitmer won by 10.5 points statewide, despite being viewed as controversial by a lot of Republicans. Nevada was the only bright spot for Republicans in the governor's races. It was their only flip. The Sisolak, the incumbent Democrat, is going to lose by 13,000 votes at the end of the day to Joe Lombardo, who's the sheriff of Clark County. Just to point it out, Cortez Masto, the Democrat, won the Senate race because she did really well in Washoe and was able to hit that 50K firewall in Clark. Sisolak underperformed Cortez Masto by 4% in Washoe. So again, she netted 9,000 votes out of Washoe. He only netted 3,000, or actually 2,500 rather. And then Clark County, which again I said, to win as a Democrat in Nevada, you have to net 50,000 votes out of Clark County, which is obviously where Vegas is, right? 50K Clark, that's the number. Sisolak only got 39K. So that's why he was unable to win statewide, despite having decent numbers at the end. So rare, I guess, good showing for Republicans in the governor's races. New Mexico, unsurprisingly, Michelle Lujan Grisham held on by mid-single digits. New York was closer than I thought. Kathy Hochul just completely collapsed upstate. But she still won, unsurprisingly. Oregon, Tina Kotek's going to win, or is right now. She's up by 3.5, could be up to 4 when all the votes are in, because we still have, I think, a couple thousand votes left to count from Portland. But either way, she'll win by but 3.5, 4 points when it's all said and done here. And she lost most of the swing counties, but again, Oregon's still a blue state, and I think partisanship kind of bailed her out at the end of the day. Pennsylvania, bloodbath for Doug Mastriano, obviously. Unsurprisingly, he lost, but I didn't I thought he'd lose by 6, not 14. So that's pretty funny to me that he lost by that much. He got killed in the Philadelphia suburbs because of again, Mastriano was a right-wing election denier who literally was caught on film saying, he wanted to ban gay marriage and ban abortion in all cases with no exceptions, which is not a popular position to take for a lot of moderate voters. And so, he did terribly in the suburbs. He lost support with working class voters, and he nearly, by the way, Beaver County, which is what I talked about at the beginning of the podcast with Fetterman and how he was closing the gap there. Mastriano lost Beaver County outright. So, not only did Mastriano get crushed in Pittsburgh, but he also got completely annihilated in the outskirts that are supposedly Republican leaning. So, again, that's the governor's map. Democrats pick up, obviously Massachusetts and Maryland were auto pickups for them, but they won Arizona, which was big. They held on to Kansas, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and Republicans flip Nevada, but outside of that, nothing really for them to be excited about from that governor's map. So, that's it for this episode. Again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, share it with a friend. Tell me your thoughts. Again, yell at me on Twitter at Ryan Jakubowski. Read my writing at uapoit.substack.com. And with that all said, thanks for listening, and I'm going to see you all tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, next week. Sorry, I'm used to YouTube. See you all next week. Thank you, and again, have the rest of your day, guys.